The entire cabin went silent as the flight attendant looked Karen straight in the eye and said, "Ma'am, I'm afraid your carry-on bag doesn't meet our size requirements. We'll need to gate check it immediately." Karen's face turned 3 shades of red as she clutched her oversized designer bag like it was a life preserver. "You can't be serious. I paid extra for priority boarding specifically so I could keep this bag with me." But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that 20 minutes earlier, while she was busy refusing to move her precious bag so I could store my baby's diaper bag, I had quietly mentioned to that same flight attendant that someone was hogging overhead bin space with luggage that looked suspiciously larger than regulation size. The sweet revenge was just getting started, and my 6-month-old granddaughter, sleeping peacefully in my arms, had no idea she was about to witness the most satisfying case of airplane justice I'd ever seen. But let me back up and tell you how we got her. My name is Dorothy Chen, and at 58, I thought I'd experienced every possible travel nightmare this side of a cancelled Christmas flight. I've been flying for business and family for over 30 years, back when airlines actually fed you real meals and treated passengers like human beings instead of cargo. This particular Thursday morning, I was flying from Seattle to Denver with the most precious carry-on I'd ever transported, my 6-month-old granddaughter, Lucy. My daughter Sarah had come down with a terrible case of food poisoning the night before her business conference, and since I'm recently retired from my job as a pediatric nurse, I volunteered to take Lucy to visit my son Michael in Colorado. Now, traveling alone with a baby at my age isn't exactly a walk in the park. My knees aren't what they used to be after 40 years of standing in hospital corridors, and my back protests every time I have to bend down to pick up dropped toys or bottles. But there's something about holding that little one that makes all the aches and pains fade into the background. I'd packed what I call the diaper bag of doom, a massive carrier filled with everything a baby could possibly need during a 3-hour flight: diapers, formula, bottles, extra clothes, toys, blankets, burp cloths, and enough baby supplies to stock a small daycare. The thing probably weighed 20 pounds, but every ounce was essential. I'd also packed light for myself, just a small personal item that could fit under the seat. After decades of travel, I've learned that when you're flying with a baby, every inch of storage space becomes precious real estate. The flight was scheduled to board at 9:15 a.m., and I arrived at the gate around 8:30, wanting to get settled early. Lucy was being an absolute angel, cooing and smiling at the other passengers in the waiting area. Several grandmotherly types stopped by to admire her, and I found myself swelling with that particular brand of grandparent pride that catches you off guard even when you're expecting it. That's when I first noticed her. She was sitting 3 seats away from the gate counter, and everything about her screamed, "I'm more important than everyone else in this airport." Designer workout clothes that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. A handbag that looked like it belonged in a museum display case. And an attitude that you could feel from across the waiting area. She was on her phone, speaking loudly enough for half the terminal to hear her conversation. "No, Marcus, I specifically told you I needed the Mercedes detailed before I get back, not the BMW. The BMW is fine. I'm taking it to the country club on Saturday." I tried not to roll my eyes. Lucy gurgled happily in my arms, blissfully unaware that we were sharing space with someone who apparently needed multiple luxury cars detailed on a regular basis. The woman, let's call her Karen, because honestly, what else would you call her, had not 1, not 2, but 3 bags surrounding her chair. A massive rolling suitcase that was clearly too big for carry-on regulations, the designer purse, and what looked like a laptop bag that could have doubled as a small duffel. I've seen this type before. The traveler who acts like they've purchased the entire airplane instead of just one seat. The person who boards first and then takes up enough overhead bin space for 3 passengers. But I wasn't too worried about it yet. After all, I had my own seat assignment, and surely there would be room for 1 diaper bag in the overhead compartments. Oh, how wrong I was. Boarding began right on time, and I gathered my things carefully. Lucy was still being perfect, which any parent or grandparent will tell you is both a blessing and a source of mild anxiety, because you know it's probably too good to last. I had a seat in row 12, which meant I'd board with group 3. Karen, apparently, had somehow managed to secure priority boarding, because she was up and moving toward the gate agent before they'd even finished the announcement for Group 1. I watched as she rolled her oversized bag down the jetway, leaving her other 2 bags for what I assumed was a second trip, or maybe a companion who hadn't shown up yet. When Group 3 was called, I made my way slowly down the aisle, Lucy in one arm and the diaper bag slung over my shoulder. The bag was heavy, and my shoulder was already starting to ache, but I've carried heavier things in my nursing career. As I approached row 12, I could see that the overhead bins were already starting to fill up. This is the new reality of air travel, everyone trying to avoid checked bag fees by cramming everything possible into the cabin. I found my row and looked up at the overhead bin directly above my seat. And there, taking up at least half the compartment space, was Karen's enormous rolling bag. That should have been fine. There was still room for my diaper bag. But as I started to lift it up, and let me tell you, lifting a 20-pound bag over your head while holding a baby is no joke when you're pushing 60. Karen suddenly appeared in the aisle beside me. "Excuse me," she said, in a tone that wasn't actually asking to be excused for anything. "That space is taken." I paused, my diaper bag halfway to the overhead bin. "I'm sorry? That overhead space. It's taken. I have another bag that needs to go up there." I looked around, confused. "But this is the bin above my seat. Row 12. Karen smiled, but it was one of those smiles that doesn't reach your eyes. "Well, I paid for priority boarding, which means I get first choice of overhead space. And I need that entire compartment for my belongings." I felt my jaw drop slightly. In 30 years of flying, I'd never heard anything so ridiculous. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "the overhead bin above your assigned seat is for your use, but this is above my seat. And there's clearly room for both bags." Karen's expression hardened. "Look, lady, I don't think you understand how this works. I paid extra for priority boarding specifically so I wouldn't have to deal with this." She gestured vaguely at me and Lucy. The passenger behind me in line was starting to get impatient. I could feel people backing up in the aisle, and Lucy was beginning to fuss slightly. She could sense the tension even if she didn't understand it. "I understand perfectly how boarding works," I said, my nurse voice starting to emerge. "I've been flying longer than you've probably been alive. But I also understand that overhead bin space above each row is shared by the passengers in that row." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh. "Fine, but I'm warning you, if there's any damage to my bag from your whatever that thing is, I'm holding you personally responsible." She stepped aside with a dramatic flourish, as if she was doing me the world's biggest favor. I started to lift the diaper bag again, but now Lucy was definitely getting fussier. She was making those little pre-crying sounds that every parent and grandparent knows means you have about 30 seconds before a full meltdown. The diaper bag felt heavier than ever, and my shoulder was screaming. I got it about 3/4 of the way up when Lucy decided she'd had enough of being jostled around and let out a proper wail. The bag slipped from my grip and came down with a soft thud. "Are you kidding me?" Karen shrieked. "You just hit my bag with that thing." "I didn't hit anything," I said, trying to bounce Lucy gently to calm her down. "The bag didn't even touch yours." But Karen was on a roll now. She grabbed her rolling bag from the overhead bin and started examining it like she was conducting a forensic investigation. "There's a scuff mark here that wasn't there before," she announced loudly. "This bag costs more than most people make in a month." The entire cabin was watching now. Other passengers were craning their necks to see what the commotion was about. Lucy was crying harder, which was making me more flustered, which was making it harder to think clearly. "Ma'am," said a voice behind us. I turned to see a flight attendant approaching, a woman about my age with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Janet. "Is there a problem here?" Janet asked. Karen immediately launched into her version of events. "This woman damaged my luggage with her oversized bag, and she's disrupting the entire flight with that crying baby." I felt my face get hot. The baby is crying because this woman is causing a scene and refusing to let me put my diaper bag in the overhead bin above my own seat. Janet looked back and forth between us, then up at the overhead compartment. I could see her experienced eyes taking in the situation, Karen's oversized bag taking up more space than it should, my clearly baby-related diaper bag still on the floor, and Lucy crying in my arms. "Ma'am," Janet said to Karen, "may I see your boarding pass?" Karen huffed but produced her boarding pass. "Row 8, Seat A," Janet read aloud. "This is row 12. Your assigned overhead space would be above row 8. I told you, I paid for priority boarding," Karen snapped. That gives me first choice of overhead space wherever I want it. Janet's expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. Actually, ma'am, priority boarding allows you to board early and choose from available overhead space near your assigned seat. It doesn't give you the right to claim space above other passengers' rows. And that's when I reached into my bag and everything changed. What I pulled out wasn't dramatic or threatening. It was just a small card from my wallet. But it was a card I'd carried for 40 years, and it was about to turn this entire situation around. Janet, I said quietly, before we go any further, I think you should know I'm a retired pediatric nurse. I spent 4 decades working in children's hospitals, and I've taken probably 1,000 flights for medical conferences, patient transfers, and family emergencies. I handed her the small card. It was my retired airline staff courtesy card, something I'd earned through years of working with medical transport teams and maintaining relationships with airline medical personnel. Janet's eyes widened slightly as she read the card. Mrs. Chen, I had no idea. Thank you for your service to children and families. Karen was looking back and forth between us, clearly confused about what was happening. The reason I'm mentioning this, I continued, keeping my voice calm despite Lucy's continued crying, is because I've never, in all my years of flying, encountered a passenger who claimed that priority boarding gave them the right to monopolize overhead space above other passengers' seats. Janet nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Chen. And I apologize that you've had to deal with this situation. She turned to Karen with a completely different expression, still professional, but noticeably cooler. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to move your bag to the overhead space above your assigned seat in row 8. Mrs. Chen has every right to use the space above row 12. Karen's face was turning red again. This is ridiculous. I specifically paid extra so I wouldn't have to deal with cramped overhead space. Then perhaps, Janet said with a smile that was all politeness and zero warmth, you should have purchased a first-class ticket, which comes with guaranteed overhead space and priority handling. But Janet wasn't done. As Karen grudgingly started to pull her rolling bag from the overhead bin, Janet was examining it more closely. Ma'am, may I measure this bag? It appears to be larger than our standard carry-on dimensions. What? No, that bag has been on dozens of flights. But Janet was already pulling out one of those metal measuring frames that gate agents use to check bag sizes. She guided Karen's bag into the frame, and it was immediately obvious that the bag was too big, too tall, too wide, and definitely too thick. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this bag exceeds our carry-on size restrictions. It should have been caught at the gate. Karen's voice got higher and more shrill. But I already brought it on the plane. You can't just decide now that it doesn't fit. Actually, Janet said calmly, flight crew has the final authority over cabin safety and baggage compliance. This bag needs to be gate checked. The entire cabin erupted in scattered applause. Other passengers who had been watching the drama unfold started clapping and cheering. Someone toward the back called out, about time. Karen looked around wildly, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. This is discrimination. I'm going to report this airline. But Janet had one more surprise in store. Ma'am, before you do that, I should probably mention that our conversation has been recorded on the cabin's audio system for safety purposes. Including your claim that priority boarding gives you the right to monopolize other passengers' overhead space, your accusation that Mrs. Chen damaged your bag when video evidence clearly shows no contact occurred, and your complaint about a baby crying, which is not a valid reason to deny a passenger service. Janet's professional smile never wavered. Additionally, since your bag is oversized and you failed to declare it at check-in, there will be a gate check fee of $50, plus a non-compliance fee of $75. Karen's mouth fell open. $125? For your mistake? Actually, ma'am, the mistake was bringing an oversized bag on board and then claiming overhead space you weren't entitled to. The fees are standard policy. 2 other flight attendants had appeared to help escort Karen's bag off the plane for gate checking. As they were tagging it for checked baggage, one of them mentioned to Janet that they'd need to do a random security inspection since the bag hadn't gone through checked luggage screening. How long will that take? Karen demanded. Oh, probably 2 to 3 hours, the flight attendant said cheerfully. Security is very thorough with last-minute checked bags. But don't worry, it'll be waiting for you when you land. Eventually. As Karen was escorted back to her assigned seat in row 8 without her precious oversized bag, Janet turned to me with a genuine smile. "Mrs. Chen, I am so sorry about this disruption. Let me help you get that diaper bag situated." She took the heavy bag from my tired arms and placed it gently in the overhead bin above my seat. There was plenty of room now, of course. "Is there anything else I can do to make your flight more comfortable? I know traveling with a little one can be challenging." Lucy had finally stopped crying and was looking around with those wide, curious eyes that babies get when they're taking in new surroundings. "Actually," Janet said, lowering her voice, "we have a few empty seats in the bulkhead row. More legroom, and easier access to the diaper bag. Would you like me to move you up there?" I could have cried from relief. The bulkhead seats were usually reserved for passengers with disabilities or families with small children, but they often got taken by travelers who lied about their needs. "That would be wonderful," I said. "Thank you so much." As Janet was updating my seat assignment on her tablet, she leaned in closer. "Between you and me, Mrs. Chen, we get passengers like that woman every week. People who think paying for priority boarding makes them first-class citizens. It's refreshing to meet someone who actually understands how air travel works." She paused, looking down at Lucy, who was now happily grabbing at the colorful toys I'd attached to her carrier. "And it's even more refreshing to meet a fellow healthcare worker. My daughter is a NICU nurse at Denver Children's. She'd be honored to know you were on my flight." The rest of the flight was absolutely perfect. Lucy slept for most of the trip, curled up contentedly against my chest in the spacious bulkhead seat. The other passengers were friendly and helpful. Several people stopped by to admire the baby and share stories about their own grandchildren. Janet checked on us regularly, bringing me extra water and making sure I had everything I needed. She even warmed up Lucy's bottle when feeding time came around. But the best part came about an hour into the flight, when Janet stopped by with a small gift bag. "This is from the crew," she said. "We wanted to thank you for your patience and your service to children and families over the years." Inside the bag was a set of airline wings for Lucy, a small stuffed airplane, and a handwritten note from the flight crew thanking me for my years as a pediatric nurse. I had to dab my eyes with a tissue. "This is so thoughtful, thank you." "Actually, Mrs. Chen, there's one more thing," Janet said with a mischievous smile. "I thought you might like to know that we just received word from ground crew about that oversized bag." She leaned in conspiratorially. "It seems that during the security inspection, they discovered several items that weren't properly declared: expensive electronics, luxury cosmetics, some jewelry that should have been declared for customs purposes." My eyebrows went up. "Oh my. The passenger will be meeting with customs officials when we land. The whole process could take, well, several hours, maybe longer." I tried to hide my smile. "That's unfortunate, isn't it?" Janet agreed with twinkling eyes. As we began our descent into Denver, I looked down at Lucy sleeping peacefully in my arms and reflected on what had just happened. For the first hour of the flight, I'd been stressed, frustrated, and honestly a little intimidated by Karen's aggressive behavior. Traveling with a baby when you're pushing 60 isn't easy under the best of circumstances, and having someone actively make it more difficult had left me feeling helpless. But sometimes, justice has a way of working itself out. Sometimes, the people who think they're entitled to special treatment because they paid a few extra dollars end up learning that kindness and respect matter more than money. Karen had spent the entire flight sulking in her middle seat in row 8, wedged between two large men who didn't seem particularly interested in accommodating her attitude. Every time I walked past her row on the way to the lavatory, she glared at me like this was somehow all my fault. Meanwhile, I was comfortable in my spacious bulkhead seat, with a baby who had slept peacefully for most of the flight and a crew who had gone out of their way to make sure we were taken care of. When we landed in Denver, Janet made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our disembarkation process. Passengers with small children or those needing extra assistance will be allowed to deplane first." She looked directly at me and smiled. "Mrs. Chen, that includes you." As I gathered my things and prepared to leave the plane, Karen called out from her seat in row 8. "Excuse me, I have a connection to catch. I need to get off this plane now." Janet's voice was perfectly polite and perfectly firm. "Ma'am, you'll need to wait for your row to be called. And don't forget you'll need to collect your checked bag from baggage claim before proceeding to customs." The look on Karen's face was priceless. My son Michael was waiting for me at the gate, and his face lit up when he saw Lucy and me walking up the jetway. "Mom, how was the flight? Was Lucy okay?" "Oh," I said with a smile, "it was quite an adventure. But everything worked out perfectly in the end." As Michael took Lucy from my arms and she immediately started cooing and smiling at her uncle, I heard a commotion behind us. Karen was arguing with a gate agent about her checked bag and something about customs delays. "Ma'am, you'll need to proceed to baggage claim first, then to customs. There's been a slight delay with your luggage inspection." I didn't stick around to hear the rest of the conversation. I had more important things to do, like watching my son meet his niece for the first time and knowing that Lucy's first airplane adventure had ended with a story I'd be telling at family dinners for years to come. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't something you plan. It's just watching the universe deliver exactly what someone deserves, with a little help from good people who understand that treating others with respect and kindness is always the right choice, no matter how much you paid for your ticket. And sometimes, when you're a grandmother traveling with a baby and dealing with someone who thinks priority boarding makes them royalty, the sweetest victory is simply watching that person learn that in the end, common decency matters more than designer luggage. That's a lesson worth teaching, at 30,000 feet or anywhere else. But wait, the story doesn't end there. 3 days later, I was sitting in Michael's living room, bouncing Lucy on my knee and telling the whole airplane story to my daughter-in-law Rebecca, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a Denver area code. "Mrs. Chen? This is Janet Martinez from the airline. I was your flight attendant on Thursday's flight from Seattle." "Oh, Janet, how lovely to hear from you. Is everything okay?" Janet's voice sounded excited. "Mrs. Chen, I hope you don't mind me calling, but something amazing has happened, and I wanted to share it with you." "Of course, what is it?" "Well, after our flight on Thursday, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened with that difficult passenger and how gracefully you handled the situation. So I wrote up a detailed report about the incident, not to get anyone in trouble, but to highlight how a retired healthcare professional managed a stressful situation with dignity and patience." I was curious where this was going. "That was very kind of you, Janet." The report made it all the way up to our corporate office. And yesterday, I got a call from the airline's customer relations manager. "They want to feature your story in our internal newsletter as an example of the kind of passengers we're honored to serve." My jaw dropped. "Feature my story? But that's not even the best part," Janet continued, her voice getting more animated. "The airline wants to offer you and your family complimentary round-trip tickets anywhere in the continental United States. They said passengers like you, healthcare professionals who've dedicated their lives to serving others, represent the very best of what air travel should be about." I had to sit down. Lucy looked up at me with those big curious eyes, as if she sensed something important was happening. "Janet, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous. There's one more thing," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Remember how I mentioned that my daughter works at Denver Children's Hospital? Well, when I told her about meeting you and how you'd been a pediatric nurse for 40 years, she asked if you'd be interested in doing some volunteer work with the hospital's family support program. Nothing strenuous, just talking to families, sharing your experience, maybe helping train new nurses in family communication." Tears started welling up in my eyes. I would be honored. After I hung up with Janet, I sat there for a long time thinking about how one terrible encounter with an entitled passenger had somehow turned into multiple unexpected blessings. But the surprises weren't finished yet. The next morning, Michael showed me something on his phone that made me laugh out loud. "Mom, you need to see this. Someone posted about our flight on social media." He showed me a Twitter thread that had gone viral. "Just witnessed the most satisfying airplane justice ever. Entitled woman tried to hog overhead space, was incredibly rude to grandmother traveling with baby. Flight crew shut her down hard. Bag got confiscated, fees charged, customs delay. Meanwhile, grandma got upgraded and crew brought her gifts. Faith in humanity restored." The thread had been shared thousands of times, with hundreds of comments from people sharing their own airplane horror stories and praising the flight crew for standing up to entitled behavior. "Look at some of these comments, Mom," Michael said, scrolling through the responses. "This is why I love flight attendants. They don't get paid enough to deal with jerks. Grandmother probably has more travel experience than that Karen will ever have. Flight crew recognizing healthcare workers equals perfection. Justice served at 30,000 feet." 2 weeks later, I was back home in Seattle, getting ready for my first volunteer shift at Denver Children's Hospital. I decided to take Janet's daughter up on her offer and had booked a return trip using one of my complimentary tickets, when I got another unexpected phone call. This one was from Karen. I almost didn't answer when I saw the unfamiliar number, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Chen? This is the woman from the airplane. From the flight to Denver 2 weeks ago. I was so shocked I nearly dropped the phone. How did you get my number? I called the airline. I told them I needed to reach you to apologize. There was a long pause. I could hear what sounded like traffic in the background. Mrs. Chen, I owe you an apology. A big one. I didn't know what to say, so I waited for her to continue. That day at the airport, I was having the worst week of my life. I just found out my mother has dementia. My divorce was being finalized, and I was flying to Denver to clean out her house before moving her into memory care. I was angry and scared and taking it out on everyone around me. Her voice was shaking now. But that's no excuse for how I treated you. You were traveling with a baby, trying to manage all that responsibility, and instead of being helpful or even just civil, I made your day harder. I found myself softening despite everything that had happened. I appreciate you calling to apologize. That takes courage. There's more, she continued. After I finally got through customs that day and you were right, it took hours. I missed my connection and had to spend the night in the airport. I had a lot of time to think about what had happened. She paused again. I realized that I've become someone I don't like very much. Someone who thinks money and status give me the right to treat other people badly. Someone my mother would be ashamed of. What happened with your mother's situation? I asked gently, my nurse instincts kicking in. I got her moved into a wonderful memory care facility. And you know what? The head nurse there reminded me so much of you, professional, kind, completely unflappable even when dealing with difficult family members like me. I could hear her taking a deep breath. Mrs. Chen, I know this is a lot to ask, but I'm wondering if you'd let me buy you coffee sometime. Not to make excuses, but to thank you properly for teaching me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. 3 days later, I met Karen, whose real name turned out to be Catherine, at a quiet coffee shop near Seattle's waterfront. She looked completely different from the woman I'd encountered at the airport. Gone were the designer workout clothes and entitled attitude. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a sweater, and her whole demeanor seemed softer, more human. I brought something for you, she said, sliding a small wrapped package across the table. For your granddaughter. Inside was a beautiful handmade baby blanket. My mother taught me to knit when I was little, Catherine explained. I hadn't touched knitting needles in 20 years, but something about our encounter made me want to create something beautiful instead of just consuming things. I ran my fingers over the soft yarn. Catherine, this is lovely. Lucy will treasure this. I've been volunteering at the memory care facility, she continued. Helping with activities, reading to the residents, just trying to give back instead of always taking. She looked down at her coffee cup. I keep thinking about what you said on the plane about understanding how air travel works because you'd been flying for decades. You were right, I was acting like someone who thought the world owed me something just because I could afford priority boarding. We all have bad days, I said gently. The measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, it's what they do afterward. I want you to know that I've written letters to the airline praising Janet and her crew, Catherine said. And I've made a donation to Denver Children's Hospital in your name. I was touched by the genuine effort she was making to right her wrongs. As we sat there talking over coffee, I learned that Catherine had been a successful marketing executive who'd lost herself somewhere in the pursuit of status and material things. Her mother's dementia diagnosis had been a wake-up call, but our airplane encounter had been the catalyst that made her actually change her behavior. You know what the strangest part is? She said as we prepared to leave. I'm happier now than I've been in years. Volunteering at the memory care facility, spending real time with my mother while she still recognizes me, making things with my hands instead of just buying them. It feels like I'm remembering who I used to be before I got so caught up in trying to impress people. I smiled. That's wonderful, Catherine. Your mother raised you well. Sometimes we just need reminders of what we already know. As we hugged goodbye, Catherine said something that stayed with me. Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that every time I fly now, I try to be the kind of passenger who makes the flight attendants' jobs easier, not harder. And when I see someone traveling with children or elderly passengers who need help, I ask what I can do instead of getting annoyed. 6 months later, I was back in Denver visiting Michael and his family. Lucy was crawling now, and she loved playing with the beautiful blanket Catherine had made for her. Watching that little one explore her world with such fearless curiosity reminded me daily of how much can change in just half a year. The blanket had become Lucy's favorite comfort item. She would crawl over to wherever I had folded it and pull herself up using the soft yarn edges, babbling happily as she buried her face in the gentle texture. Michael and Rebecca often commented on how remarkable it was that something born from such a difficult encounter had become such a source of joy for their daughter. "You know, Mom," Michael had said to me just that morning as we watched Lucy play, "every time I see her with that blanket, I think about how people can surprise you. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that the woman who caused all that drama on your flight would end up making Lucy's favorite toy, I never would have believed it." But perhaps even more meaningful than the blanket was the friendship that had developed between Janet and me. She had become more than just a flight attendant who had helped me through a difficult situation. She had become a true friend and kindred spirit. Our shared backgrounds in healthcare had given us an immediate connection, but it was our similar values about treating people with dignity and respect that had cemented our bond. Janet had invited me to attend an airline training session where they used my story to teach new employees about conflict resolution and customer service. Standing in that conference room, looking out at 25 young flight attendants and gate agents, I had felt both humbled and honored to share what I'd learned over my decades of dealing with difficult situations in hospitals and, apparently, airports. The most important thing to remember, I had told them during the Q&A session, is that behind every difficult passenger is usually someone who's scared, stressed, or dealing with something in their personal life that has nothing to do with you. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, but understanding it can help you respond with both firmness and compassion. One young flight attendant had raised her hand. "But how do you know when to be compassionate and when to set boundaries?" I had smiled, thinking of Catherine. "You do both. You can acknowledge someone's stress while still protecting the rights and comfort of other passengers. The key is maintaining your own dignity while helping others maintain theirs." After the training session, Janet and I had gone to lunch, where she shared that several attendants had approached her afterward saying my presentation had changed how they thought about their jobs. "They're not just enforcing rules anymore," Janet had explained. "They're seeing themselves as guardians of the travel experience for everyone on the plane." But the moment that really brought everything full circle happened at baggage claim after my flight landed that day. I was waiting for my suitcase, watching the carousel slowly rotate and thinking about how much I was looking forward to spending time with Lucy, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me, sir, do you need help with that heavy bag? I'd be happy to lift it down for you." The voice was warm and genuinely helpful, without a trace of the entitlement or impatience I remembered from 6 months earlier. I turned around to see Catherine helping an elderly gentleman retrieve his suitcase from the baggage carousel. The man appeared to be in his 80s, moving slowly with a cane, and clearly struggling with the weight of his luggage. Catherine was dressed simply in comfortable traveling clothes, and everything about her demeanor radiated the kind of quiet helpfulness that makes airports feel less overwhelming. She carefully lifted the man's bag and set it gently on his luggage cart, then asked if he needed help finding transportation. "My son is picking me up at door B," the gentleman said. "But I'm not sure which way that is." "I'm heading that direction," Catherine replied. "I'd be happy to walk with you and make sure you find it." It was then that she spotted me across the room. Her face lit up with genuine warmth, and she gave me a wave that held none of the awkwardness I might have expected from someone I'd last seen in a tense airport confrontation. After she had helped the elderly gentleman connect with his son, Catherine made her way over to me. The change in her was remarkable, not just in her appearance, which was more natural and relaxed, but in her entire presence. She moved through the busy airport with a calm awareness of the people around her, offering assistance where needed and creating small pockets of kindness in what could be a stressful environment. "Mrs. Chen, what a wonderful surprise," she said, giving me a hug that felt genuinely affectionate. "How is little Lucy? And how was your flight?" "Lucy is crawling everywhere and keeping everyone on their toes," I replied. "And the flight was smooth, thanks to another wonderful crew." "I'm so glad to hear that," Catherine said. "I was actually hoping I might run into you someday. There's something I've been wanting to tell you." We found a quiet spot near the windows overlooking the tarmac, where Catherine shared what had been happening in her life since our coffee meeting months earlier. Later, as we walked toward the exit together, she told me she was in Denver visiting her mother. But this time, her voice held a different quality when she spoke about the visit, still touched with sadness about her mother's condition, but also filled with a peace I hadn't heard before. She's doing well, Catherine said. Some days are better than others, but she still remembers the important things. We spend our time looking through old photo albums and talking about family memories. I've learned to treasure the moments when she's fully present instead of mourning the ones when she's not. She paused as we navigated around a family struggling with their luggage, and I watched as Catherine instinctively slowed her pace and offered to help them organize their bags more efficiently. You know what she told me last week? Catherine continued after we'd helped the family get sorted. She said she was proud of me for learning to treat people with kindness again. She said it reminded her of the little girl I used to be, always wanting to help others and make them feel better. The emotion in Catherine's voice was genuine and deep. Mrs. Chen, I don't think I ever properly thanked you for what you did that day on the airplane. Not just standing up to my bad behavior, but doing it in a way that left room for me to grow instead of just putting me in my place. I was touched by her words, but also struck by her continued growth. Catherine, you did the hard work of changing. I just happened to be there when you needed a mirror held up to your behavior. That's exactly it, she said. You were a mirror, but a kind one. You showed me who I was becoming without making me feel like that was all I could ever be. As we reached the exit, Catherine told me about the volunteer work she'd continued at the memory care facility, but also about other ways she'd been trying to spread kindness. She had started what she called airport angel moments, small acts of helpfulness during her frequent business travels. Last month, I helped a young mother navigate security with twins, she said with pride. And 2 weeks ago, I spent my layover helping an elderly couple figure out their connecting gate. It's become my favorite part of traveling. She smiled, and I could see the genuine contentment in her expression. I keep thinking about something you said during our coffee meeting, that the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but what they do afterward. I'm trying every day to make sure my afterward reflects the person I want to be. As I watched Catherine say goodbye and head toward her ride, I reflected on how that terrible morning at the airport had somehow transformed into something beautiful. Not just the immediate satisfaction of watching entitled behavior get its comeuppance, but the long-term ripple effects of one difficult encounter. Standing there in the Denver airport, watching the constant stream of travelers hurrying past, some stressed, some excited, some tired, all carrying their own stories and struggles, I thought about how many opportunities we have every single day to choose kindness over convenience, compassion over judgment, understanding over assumption. Catherine's transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of conscious effort, self-reflection, and the courage to admit that her previous behavior hadn't reflected her true values. But watching her help that elderly gentleman at baggage claim, seeing the natural way she now moved through the world looking for opportunities to be helpful rather than ways to assert her importance, I knew that the change was real and lasting. Sometimes the best stories aren't just about justice being served, they're about people finding their way back to the kindness that was always inside them. Sometimes standing up for yourself with dignity doesn't just protect your own rights, it reminds others of who they want to be. And sometimes, when you're traveling with a baby and dealing with someone who's forgotten how to treat others with respect, the most powerful thing you can do is simply model the behavior you want to see in the world. That's a lesson worth sharing, whether you're 30,000 feet in the air or standing on solid ground. Lucy's first airplane adventure taught all of us something important. Kindness is contagious, justice has a way of working itself out, and there's always room for people to grow even in the overhead compartments of life.